Here. Rebecca Kirk. Here. Alan Cohen.
Here.
Kathleen Shanahan. Ron
Here.
Costello. Oh, there we go. Ron Costello.
Here.
Sue Carlton. Here. Allison Hewitt.
Thank you. Next we'll have public comment. Anybody sign up for public comment? Okay, seeing none. That will entertain a motion to approve the prior meeting minutes from June 9, 2026.
I still have to motion, not until necessary.
I just have an amendment, I don't, for the motion regarding section 6.03 that passed during our last meeting, this is a point confirmed. I don't think I was the only one who voted no, I thought there was a couple who voted working on that.
That was on the final paragraph, wasn't it, that you referred to?
Those were, it flip flopped the point.
Yeah, so kind of changes, we brought it up.
Yeah.
And I don't remember anyone else. That's being.
I don't remember either, I just thought there was a couple votes on it.
It was the motion to approve the charter language for the. Appointing and nominating. And Bobby thought that someone else. Where it comes down on that, but I don't remember, does anyone else remember a second person?
We got video.
Do those now, then I'll move to approve.
All right, do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, so move the properly seconded. Motion carries. Oh, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. All right, motion carries.
Okay, so that was Bobby and Gary. I got help for our shot here, we're going really fast. Just trying to see how it's doing. Okay, great, let's jump in. I need to shrink you guys on my VP skill argument. Wanted to just take stock of where we are, where we're headed. So we have completed our review of the current charter language with final action follows. We have some changes to the charter that Ken has drafted. Then I want to bring us back to a council question that I don't have us having discussed, but you may need to refresh my memory. It's just hanging out there. And it has to do with reviewing interim appointment timeframes. Hopefully that won't take too long. The second area is public comment. We have one item remaining around the concept of the independent Inspector General or Ethics Commission, etc. We have received a response from the city's HR department. Ken had provided some good research. And then finally, we have two discussion items to complete as of today. One is around zoning with 4 related action items. We're gonna actually start there because we have a guest. And then Ashley, you had resurrected the conversation around the potential for the charter being amended to account for and reinforce the timely completion of projects. So we're gonna circle back to that with you too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our time is in a matchup, so, and then we had to reschedule.
Okay.
Again.
We get it.
Still trying to get it nailed down.
Okay, so that's where we are on these. We're gonna kind of go backwards for a couple of reasons, but one, I want to be respectful of my colleagues' time today, so I'm gonna zip over to that section of our tracking document. We'll jump in on that zoning issue first. I hope you guys are all revved up and ready to go. Welcome back to the stage. You were a trooper last time. I mean, it would have been me. I've been brought sleeping. Let's keep going. You had to, it's like 1:30. You had me on the edge of my seat. They really. Okay. So I want to just go through all the actions, just summarize those and backtrack so that Julie can speak to us. So the first one. That was an easy one for me to do because we worked together. So Julia said yes immediately. Abby Keeley is out of the office and will come tomorrow, but will come to speak to us next meeting if we wish for her to do so. Regarding the city council, the request was, it was brought up in the council meeting as to whether or not anyone had any input for our consideration around this issue, but no responses were received. And then Ken did some research on zoning language that may be useful. I have that open somewhere else. So those are the 4 action items. But again, because Julia is joining us, I'd like to start with that. You know, Julia, of course, the county attorney, but she has a history land use zoning and can really speak to her experience and learnings from all that time being in that business. So
What's a good?
yeah, come right up to the front if you don't mind.
Sure.
Guys are friendly.
Well, good, and yeah, I know some of you, but there's many of you I don't know, so let me just take a minute to introduce myself, so I don't have that teacher. My name is Julia Mandel, and as you see there, I'm currently the Hillsborough County Attorney. I'm not here in that capacity, but I have been in this world for a long time, but I have some experience with the way they do their zonings. But I was also the Tampa City Attorney for 3 years, and that was an exciting part of my life. But literally the most exciting part of my career was the 10 years that I was involved in the city's land use processes, where I was the senior assistant city attorney engaged involved in the land use processes. I should also note that I was in private practice for 7 years, and during that time I did represent private clients as well. So my experience in the land use world is pretty broad on all sides, and I also happen to love this area of law. So for me, this is just like very, very geeky fun for me to talk about this kind of stuff. So I didn't prepare anything, but what I thought I would do is what I understood some of the conversations you all have had is related to both a zoning hearing master and or some other kind of hearing officer situation that we don't have in the city of Tampa, but we do have in Hillsborough County, and that is also within many other jurisdictions. So perhaps I can just kind of step back on that. When I was the land use attorney, not the city attorney, but just the land use attorney for the city, there was a conversation that occurred, and I can't exactly remember what year. Rebecca Kurt and I worked together in the city. She may remember this, the time frame. I'm not entirely sure, maybe 2008, 2009 timeframe. That exact question was asked by city council, and they asked for us to make a presentation from the city attorney's office over what that process would look like. I wish I could have found that oral presentation, because it was actually a pretty good one. It was, I think, my first PowerPoint, but it was a long time. But I do think that there's some good information that I can provide you with all my various experiences, even though that was rejected at the time. Let me first say that the city of Tampa is unusual in a couple of ways. One, as it relates to the charter with the strong mayor form of government, and also as it relates to the role of city council in the zoning processes. So that is something that has always been an important DNA of the city of Tampa. The second thing that's really, I think, very unique with the city of Tampa, and I said this many years ago, and I'm comfortable saying it today, that of all the jurisdictions I've been involved with, besides just city of Tampa and Hillsborough County, but in private practice and other jurisdictions in the state, the city of Tampa is one of the few jurisdictions that doesn't have an interim review body or an interim review step. Meaning all of the zoning processes come directly to city council in 2 public hearings, which are prescribed by city council, city ordinance. There's no legal obligation under state law for there to be 2 public hearings like we have today, but they are in our processes in the city. First of all, and second of all, because there is no interim review process, no Board of Adjustment sometimes is the one that does it, the Land Development Review Committee, or a hearing officer, which has become more of the norm. The city council, when they hear a zoning case, they're just hearing it come to them in whatever format it is. Yes, you have staff review and comment, you have presentations, but in terms of just processing information, they're processing what they've received in written format. You can't have ex parte communications, so they're not talking to the parties in the process. They can have conversations with staff. But imagine if you were in that position and all of a sudden you're just getting all this information and you're processing it right then and there. And one might suggest that's good for the process. And there are people who believe that's good for the process. Get right in front of your electeds and make that decision at that moment in time. Some people might suggest, wait a second, is that really fair to anybody? And I don't mean just to property owners and applicants, to the public, to those council members, especially since all these meetings are held at night and they sometimes go very long. With that in mind, that was one of the things that implemented members of Tampa City Council to ask for our assistance in looking at it, modeling it after something that they have at the county, which the county has had a hearing officer in place for at least 30 years. So there are other jurisdictions, especially in Southwest Florida, Lee County being probably the most preeminent, that has a hearing officer that does do that interim review. There's a lot of different ways you can look at that. You can have, like I said, you could even have a board that hears it, a citizen board, you can, which has ups and downs. It does impose more procedure and time into the process. You can do what Hillsborough County does, and this is kind of more what you see. There's a zoning hearing master. There is a process to gather that information that is presented to the hearing master. All of the evidence and testimony that's coming forward on a particular zoning application is presented to the hearing officer. The hearing officer then has 15 days after they close the public hearing to actually write a report. And so they're processing it, and they're at the county. I think for the majority of them, they're planners, maybe engineers. I think there's been an attorney or two in the process. Whether or not you have an attorney in the process is probably subject to a debate among planners like Stephen over here and lawyers like me and Rebecca. But the bottom line is that I wouldn't look at it in terms of the who. It's that idea and that opportunity to actually allow that information to be submitted, considered with some time, and a written report granted. Now, in Hillsborough County, under most sets of circumstances, especially with zonings, the hearing officer doesn't make the decision. They make a recommendation, but they're able to synthesize the information and present it and the why of what it is they've done. That goes over to the Board of County Commissioners. And there are limitations on new evidence because these processes are quasi-judicial. And I'll spend a minute on what that looks like to those of you who haven't been involved in these kinds of matters. They don't take any additional evidence except in rare circumstances, and they review the record, and then they have the right to make the decision, the ultimate final decision. So this process in and of itself doesn't take away that final decision, but it does allow the information gathering portion of this. Now, with the city and with municipalities, there are distinctions with differences than, say, a county, because the process that you are obligated to file as it relates to a zoning has to require an ordinance, which in Florida law requires one public hearing and 2 readings of the ordinance. I've represented other municipalities in my private side of my career where those municipalities have an interim review board or a hearing officer. They hold their first reading as a perfunctory action. Basically, somebody just reads it and they move it forward, so you don't have another hearing, and then they hold that second public hearing for the required public hearing. So there's ways to modify these processes to be in line with how municipalities are obligated to operate. Counties do not have to approve zonings via ordinance, so they have a lot of they have a little bit more flexibility. But let me talk a little bit about the quasi-judicial side for those of you who are not attorneys or have probably heard the term but never really spent a lot of time pondering it, because you don't usually, unless you're in these processes. All of the zonings and we can include variances, special use permits, and all those kinds of things are obligated to be heard. Well, unless this case doesn't continue forward, that's another discussion. There's a weird case out there that be challenging this question, but let's assume it's going to be upheld at the Supreme Court. That all your actions on zonings are considered quasi-judicial. Now, what does that mean? That means our elected officials, no matter where they are not acting in the same manner that they are when they're looking at other things. They have an obligation to act in a manner which shows no bias. They have an obligation to review evidence and testimony, and they have an obligation to make their decision on the basis of the record. They don't have it is a legally fraught decision if you make your decision because there's a zoning in front of you and there's 500 people that show up and say, I don't want it. In a legislative matter, that's absolutely fine. I don't want this legislation. You have every right. Talk to your you're elected officials and you have every right to go ahead and say, I just don't want it. I think that's a bad idea. In zoning matters, specifically zoning, because that's what we're talking about, that is not the obligation of the elected officials. They are obligated to act in a manner consistent with they're sitting as judges, they have to require due process, there has to be notice of these proceedings, and they have to weigh evidence and they have to make their decision on the basis of the record. Why is that important? One of the things that develops over time when you don't have an opportunity for an interim review board or a hearing officer, and it actually builds a better record with the hearing officer, is it makes the decisions of local governments a little bit harder to defend. That's just the reality. Because they're not, when you're a judge and you're looking at these things, and a zoning just got denied, and you're arguing it as a lawyer in front of a judge, you're saying, you have the right to make the argument, well, they made this decision because 500 people showed up versus these are the facts in the record. It makes it a little bit more complicated. A hearing officer gathering facts, providing those facts in a cogent way to a board has merit in order to ensure that those decisions are more legally defended. So those are the types of things that I think as you analyze this is, and I want to say, none of this is a political issue, because it really is about providing process to people as they move through these situations. And I can tell you from my experience in private practice, one of the most frustrating things was you'd have these big developments, and I've had plenty, and I got kicked on some and I won some. It's just the nature of the business. Like when you have small developments or you have small matters that are just business people, they're just trying to get, like, especially with the alcohol permits, we treat in Tampa the alcohol permits the same way we treat zonings, which, yes, not legally required, but that's another conversation. You know, and you're just sitting there, and like you brought an attorney in because it's a very complicated process. And I can't tell you the number of times I was sitting with clients on the third floor, wondering when my case was going to get called, not because I cared, hell, I was getting paid, I was sitting there as a lawyer, but because my client would then have to pay me. And these are not like big developers or big businesses. These are small guys just trying to do their business. And I felt terrible about it. And I felt that I've always felt that if we can build more efficiencies in these processes, even though you might think it might take a little longer, I think that there's value in providing that as at least a discussion point. And I think that's something that I know, you know, city council may or may not favor, and that I totally understand. You feel close to your constituents when you get to look at these site plans, and I can decide where things are, where things go, and you feel like you can be really reactive to people's issues. And that there is value and merit in that. The problem is it creates this overabundance of time, uncertainty in a process, and stress. Again, not on the big developers. Like they got money, they're fun. I'm talking about smaller businesses and smaller groups that may not feel as comfortable in the process. And if you've got a neighborhood association that's very engaged and involved, this process is natural for them. But you've got a neighborhood association that doesn't understand the process, it can be really fraught for them too. And you know, it's an opportunity to at least, and I don't know what you'll ultimately do, and what you'll have to talk with your attorney about the appropriateness of putting something in the charter as it relates to some kind of requirement that you have an interim review board as part of the zoning process. But you know, in every event, I think there's always value in revisiting processes that are very old, been around a very long time, and haven't really changed. And I think it's probably pretty universal that most people hate the process. And I think even there are council members that are like, why am I here at 2 o'clock? Like that is hard, and nobody can be expected to make a big decision at 2 o'clock in the morning. They just cannot be. And that's not a negative on anybody sitting up there, but I think it's pretty, like, if you guys were here at 2 o'clock in the morning making decisions, you'd be, well, except I guess you were. 2 o'clock in the morning in another time.
Made that decision.
You know, I'm sorry, bad decision, no good decision is made after about 11, but that's my experience, that's what I've seen, and this is what I've seen all over the state, and I do think that the city of Tampa is really in a position where it is not necessarily the norm to handle our zonings this way. The alcohol stuff, and I know you're not talking about that, is an entirely different conversation. Because there is no legal need to use the zoning process, it's just what's developed over time, because I think that that is just something that people felt very strongly about many years ago, but I think as time has developed, I don't know that level of process is needed. So that's really, I just wanted to kind of give some flavor of my experience and background, and I'm happy to answer any questions or any thoughts you all have about the process or what you guys, I don't know very much specifically what you've been talking about, but I thought I could add some flavor to what that is.
First of all, thank you. Second of all, this conversation started 2 weeks ago. I think Rebecca really spearheaded the conversation as something for the group to consider. Any questions for Julie from the group around this problem?
This might be to both, you and can provide a list of cities, that do have language regarding zoning boards, in their charter. You mentioned that it's the exception for cities or municipalities not to have some sort of body like this. If they're not in the charter, they just appear ordinance alone without having a reference in the charter then? Okay.
I mean, you can set your process up through your ordinances the way you want to, and a lot of jurisdictions, I mean, there may be, I haven't surveyed every jurisdiction, I don't think you have, but the majority of jurisdictions do have some interim step. A lot of times it's their planning commission too, because the way we handle our planning commission is a little bit different than other jurisdictions, that's Hillsborough County and all of the municipalities.
Julie, I assume the hearing masters are well versed in the zoning, rules, regulations, all of that. Who is county's?
Susan Finch, who's been a planner, she was a planner at the county for many years, and now she does private planning work, and she is very well versed in all of this. Stephen Luce is also a planner who worked at the county for many years, and then he was in private development for a long time, so.
And you worked in both scenarios, which do you think is most efficient?
I think a hearing officer is more protective from a legal perspective.
Commissioners generally, that you're working with, they appreciate it.
I think that they would never go back to a situation where they had to like review things at first impression. They tinkered over the many years of how much new information could come in between the hearing officer's recommendation and what is in front of them. I think probably that, if anything, is the most frustrating thing, because again, you have people who show up, even if they were noticed of the zoning hearing officer, they don't always show up, or they want to bring in new evidence, or they want to argue new things. And so that's the challenge, is trying to keep that record clean, and they've created some exceptions to that, and that's a problem, I think, in any kind of, when you mix a political body with a quasi judicial proceeding. I mean, that's really what this comes down to. The elected officials are sitting in a very different way through a zoning process, rather than the way they sit as their legislative bodies, and sometimes it's hard to switch.
Any questions?
So I'm a lay person, I just watch the council meeting on TV, but that's something I always understand what's going on.
I still watch my.
So maybe just so I can have kind of like a real life example, so you mentioned that the differences when there's a hearing officer or a zoning board is it's a time saver, there's this kind of like digestive process where there's a report done and all the facts are heard before it gets to the council. So in terms of process and how that would kind of flow through meetings, so a rezoning would appear before a council as a quasi judicial board, And then do the applicants still appear, like, what is the,
Yes.
what does it look like, I guess is what I'm asking.
I'll explain the way the Hillsborough County process looks like, they're all a little bit different, but this is the way the Hillsborough County process. If you go, and if you've ever watched a Thursday night city council meeting, the zoning meetings, you basically call a case. Everybody who wants to talk, you have a presentation, people in opposition get up. And, questions get asked, you close the hearing depending on the type of hearing, and then you have deliberation. So, but all that information is coming at that council. Not all of it, some of it is pre-given to them, but all of that information, the context of it is really given to them at that hearing. In a zoning hearing, master hearing at Hillsborough County, all of that information and questions and discussions on a technical level. Because you're not getting into, because you always bleed over into some of the political side, it's just, you can't expect your politicians to not do that, like that's an unfair burden to put on them, because they see their constituents. Not happy about something, and they're always gonna feel like they wanna engage in that, and that is totally natural. I don't fault them for that, as a lawyer doing it, I was always trying to. But all of that information is taken at that zoning hearing master room, and so. It's pre-digested by a hearing officer. Put into a report with a recommendation based upon not anything more or less than, here's what I heard, here are the standards. Here is my recommendation based upon the standards. Very simplistic, but it is written out in a report that is then sent over to the Board of County Commissioners with all the evidence and testimony. Now, the way the county does it, and I think this is kind of an interesting way, and they've changed this over time, is if you have a case, everybody says, meaning all the staff are recommending approval, you had no opposition at the zoning hearing master. There's not been anybody who said anything good, bad, or indifferent from a either a legal perspective or from a policy perspective. You can go to the zoning hearing, you can go to the Board of County Commissioners, and that's held on their consent agenda. So they just automatically, you say you'll have 10 cases that'll just go through it, because nobody's pulled it off consent, everybody's comfortable with it being the right decision, all of the technical people are in support, no opposition. So there really is nothing for them, they could do it if they wanted to, but at that point, the cake is baked, as it were. So unless there's some question, move that through, so those just move through. Then you have cases if there's been opposition or there's been staff, maybe you have a staffer, one like a planning commission staff that says, we're recommending approval, the other staff are recommending denial, or you have people who've shown up in opposition, or you have a zoning hearing master who looked at it from their technical expertise and said, no, I don't agree with this. Then you go to the Board of County Commissioners, and it's a fully noticed public hearing. However, you are I don't want to say prohibited, you are limited in any new evidence that goes to that Board of County Commissioner, and they have standards. So that's their model is we want everything baked at the technical level of a hearing officer. We want that level of information, unless there's some reason we should be getting additional information. We don't want the additional information, but you can make an argument why you think the zoning hearing master who recommended denial is wrong, or you think this is wrong. And you give that opportunity for discussion and argument. But that is really more in line with a legal style process, and it can seem a little cold. I mean, I don't want there to be a suggestion that there's not a downside to this. If you're a constituent, it feels a little cold, like I should be able to get up and rally around my commissioners and have them deny this because that's what I want, because I don't like the project, or I have valid reasons. Again, people's neighborhoods are very personal, and I never take away the idea that somebody doesn't have the right to feel something about their neighbor. I think that's always an important component of this. It's just how do you take that out of the emotion and put it into the legal? And so it does feel somewhat cold. And while it's more efficient, people would argue that it takes a little longer. The process for zoning in this county does take longer because you have that interim step. And you have to build in time for that because you have 15 days. Now, it doesn't mean that's the only model. There's just other ways you can handle it. But that particular model does take a little longer. But you end up with decisions that are not going to make everybody happy, but are, from a lawyer's perspective, easier to defend either side. the county wins a lot of their cases. I mean, that's just the bottom line.
How often does the county commission reach a different conclusion than the hearing officer?
I don't think it's very often right now. I think some of that just depends. Since I've only been the county attorney for 6 months. And I was with the county for a little while before that. I can't work, there's been like 2 that I'm aware of. They're working out in other ways, but I'm not aware that it happens very often. That being said, again, we're taking a political body and we're asking them to serve as judges. And when you take a political body and you ask them to, not ask them, you obligate them to serve as judges. Some of that's always gonna just depend, and that's, you can't keep that from happening. If you put enough standards in them and you teach everybody why it's important, that helps. And I think because the county's done it this way for so long, it has helped. Now, when you talk about, say, an interim review board or a body, that creates a little bit of a different component because you've got lay people who are not political people, but they've been appointed to the board. And when, like, you're sitting with this board, you got appointed, you feel very strongly about your mission. You didn't do this like so that you can hang out with all these fine folks at Old City Hall. You feel very strongly about your mission. So you know, and you want to do the right thing. So you still have a little bit of, you have to kind of struggle with yourself over what am I doing here when you're sitting there as basically another judge. And so that makes that a little bit fraught. That being said, it does lend some credibility because if you've got a group of people who are living in the community and are your peers, it does lend credibility. I will say that those types of models work better in smaller jurisdictions where sort of everybody knows everyone, and I've seen that happen. I did a lot of work representing governmental entities in Pinellas County, and that's a big model that they have.
Any other questions from the group?
So Tampa has a variance review board in their charter, and based on what I read from Ken's compilation of the different cities that have various zoning boards in their charters, they also cover variance review. So there's layperson question, there's overlap here where a zoning board or hearing officer would also be looking at variances
Now, you could set that up that way, but a variance review board cannot make a final decision on a zoning because of the nature of state law. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to cut off your answer about it.
Oh, I thought you wanted to weigh in.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Pretty sure.
I apologize, I thought Rebecca wanted to give more flavor, because she's also a very good land use lawyer, and I trust her opinions very much. But yeah, I mean, you have both, because a variance is a different process and a different standard, and in the city has a variance review board within its charter to review things like you have a standard on a zoning and you want to change it, or you want to remove a tree, and what's that standard to review? That being said, that decision can be appealed to Tampa City Council, so there's an inherent appeal right. That's actually what they do, is they do limit, I think they still limit the record. They have a limited record on the appeal, so you can't put in more evidence and testimony. So that's kind of an interesting kind of hybrid model if you wanted to add that into a zoning hearing officer or a zoning hearing board. But again, you know, that's part of the policy analysis of how much do you want to have a process that is both a little more efficient, not more timely, but more efficient, and also can create that, because you can't have a board create like a board. I mean, because it's 7 people and it'd be hard to do that, but you have one person who says, let me take everything back. Let me go over here. And they're also subject to, you know, the boards are subject to the sunshine law the way you all are. So that's one of the reasons why having an individual, I think, is more efficient than having a board. But I don't want to say that that's the only one.
That was actually gonna be my question, one of the, I'll make a statement that I do have a question. One of the things that, in my experience, has been so helpful about the zoning hearing master. And I work at the county under the zoning hearing master, and I brought in cases to the zoning hearing master, and I've had them be in favor and again, so like I don't have any like bias towards them for any reason. But they come out with a with a list of who spoke. You know, what the issues were from the community, what the arguments were, what the codes are, how the codes apply. And they distill it down in a very professional way, and then at the end, they're like, and here are the findings of fact. Here's how they apply to the conclusions of law, and here at the end is my recommendation. To me, that's the most helpful reason to have one. And I was wondering, when you have a group of citizens, whether they be citizens who have some level of expertise or just people from the community. Is there any way for them to get that? I was thinking no, but you have a lot more experience in a lot of different jurisdictions, so I was wondering if you'd seen a way for them to get an order. I don't know how they would do that.
I've never seen a jurisdiction that successfully put together.
I don't know how you would do it with.
I mean, the only thing you can do is like,
If I make their decision.
maybe you'd be adding the extra layer, then I gotta go take this, draft it, and as the attorney, bring it back to you to make a final decision on it, which that's fraught in and of itself, because the most important thing to remember in these processes, whether it's the variance review board, the architectural review board, or any of the other boards or city council, these are all quasi judicial proceedings. And because of that, there's an extra layer of obligation to protect the record, protect what they call due process, making sure that the decision is based upon the facts. That's why as lawyers, we're always gonna say, go for a hearing officer, because it is just a better process for quasi judicial. However, I would have been remiss if I didn't get in here and say, but that is not the only model. You know, there are a lot of different models. The model we have for the city of Tampa is for zonings and alcohol beverage permits. Also for plan amendments, which has a little bit of a different nuances to quasi judicial nature, but that being said, everything just comes to that, like right away. I mean, the staff does do a really good job getting all the information, but they don't have the benefit of the public comment. Sometimes they will, but usually they don't have all of that information, so they can't distill it. And so having someone who can distill it down into a legally defensible document from a legal perspective is a very good way to do things. All of the things that I've said, however, I will tell you, when I brought this presentation forward in 2008, 2009, somewhere around then. I brought it to the city council. There was a lot of desire to proceed forward to it until both the fan neighborhood community and the land use bar was like, nope. That was the end of that conversation. So I mean, you know, everybody's used to what we do today, and there's probably some, like I said, feeling that you can go directly to your electeds and get them to make these decisions, and that is their job. Like, I don't take that away, but is it efficient? Is it the best way to handle it? Is it legally a better approach? It has a little bit more fraughtness to it.
But you just referenced, why was the land use bar opposed to this?
Do you want to answer that question? She was there with me.
The land use board was very supportive of it until the very last minute. And I mean, I can picture the people, and I can tell you why I think versus what they said.
Okay.
Because what they said was, we trust city council. And Dan was like, we trust city council, and the land use bar was like, we trust city council. But I think that what everyone felt was, both sides felt that they had the best ability to persuade city council to their side if they got to directly plead their case to them twice.
It's your mark.
I will take Rebecca's answer as
She's still in government.
I'm still in it.
I'm gonna take the hit on that one, never running for office. And I mean, that was my take on it at the time when I worked at the city, that's my take on it today, being in private practice. I didn't feel that that's a good idea then, and I don't feel that it's a good idea now. And not because I don't trust city council, I do. But you are asking an awful lot to have 500 people in front of you that are elected officials and say, I'm sorry, remember city council, that, you know, constitutional amendments are not voted on by the majority. And you can't just say, nobody wants it, even though nobody does. And that's a legal basis, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you need to articulate your comprehensive plan, go back to page 1. Oh, I'm sorry, that's like 300 pages back, and you need to cite those sections. That's a lot to ask for someone to do, and they give the zoning hearing master 15 days to go back. Reflect what everyone said, write down what everyone said, go back and reference what it was. And then you are presented with a document that is easier to look at for people. And remember that, constitutional amendments, property rights is one of them. And they're not absolute, but they can't be voted on. The entire reason that you have property rights and the entire reason you have constitutional amendments is to protect the minority, not the majority. And so therefore, it's counterintuitive to everything else your elected officials do, which is I represent my people, the people don't want it. That doesn't fly in these, and so you are providing your elected officials with the rules. And everyone still has an opportunity to speak and to access their elected officials. They get to do it before the zoning hearing officer, and I believe the way the county has changed, it used to be that was your bite at the apple unless, something, you had to trigger something to even get oral argument, and now I think you're just entitled to your arguments. So you get to make your arguments before them, if you feel like you need to make them. And so everyone gets their voice, but it's also more clearly distilled with the rules that they're obligated legally to apply.
If whether develop, whomever it may be, if the city council, let's call it a developer believes the city council got it wrong at 2 in the morning. What rights does the developer have, so to speak, to come back and that in court?
If it's a denial, then they go,
If it's a denial.
they go file a registered CRA or some other action in circuit court.
And who defends the city in that? The city attorney.
City attorney's office.
And in other situations in which successful, the city is eventually on the hook for paying damages to the developer for assuming they're.
Depending on how the case goes down, that is always a concern.
But there's a second reading. It does come back.
It does come
You can
back.
you can change your vote, but it has.
No, I'm saying that if after the second reading, a developer.
But 2 a.m. is the first, the second reading is always during the day.
Whether it's in the day or not, okay, I'll go take it, but during the day, the city decides, city council votes, for whatever reason, but they say no. Developer then says you're wrong, and for the following reasons, I just wanted to confirm the developer can then go into court, challenge it, if they've been damaged because of a delay, I assume for some reason. In other words, it seems to me, I'm going back to what you were saying, the decision is much more defensible with that layer of that what you call it, the hearing master.
Yeah,
It just seems to me it's much more protective of the city's coffers, allows city council to focus on really what they should be focusing on, the bigger picture issues, policy issues and all of that, and they ultimately make the decision.
I mean, I want to take that a step further, because what I see it as is it protective to the city, but also allowing the city council members to get information that has been distilled for them, and I think to me that's the most. As a lawyer representing governmental entities, our preference is always going to be, how can I provide the best, most defensible decision process? Like, that's just our job, like, that's what we do, and that's how we manage our clients. But I look at it from a policy perspective, and I say to myself, we've put elected officials in very difficult positions because they're making these very complicated decisions without having the information distilled to them. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I like that process.
I'm sorry, I have one clarification, and we're really short. We don't get to second reading if they kill it on Thursday. But if no vote, you don't get a second one or anything.
Could be 2 in the morning.
Could be 2 in the
So,
All those things, do I understand?
Dr. the question's for you. Is it your impression now that the land use bar's position as you described it has changed?
I don't feel comfortable speaking to the land use bar. I feel that most of them probably feel more comfortable having things distilled out, but I don't wanna speak for them, and also regardless of what they think.
Yeah.
I mean, they could.
And I also don't know what staff would say about that, I know their feelings about it, I don't, they would have issue with it.
I'm up the land use bar, which is probably all 20. Yeah, I mean, I'm kidding, but.
No, you're about,
I think that's double.
That's not,
So-
really, there's not that many of us,
Focus on,
I love it.
they, I have friends that do this. And that's, respectfully, if you're all listening, I'm more focused on what's the best, I think we all are, what's the best interest of the city, right?
But I think Alan was like, are they gonna come in and try and kill it?
It is wholly possible, and I don't point that out for anything good or bad, because I was here to give factual and policy thought process to this. But I wanted you to know why at that time, it was something that nobody wanted to pursue. But my recommendation at that time was to continue the conversation, and I would recommend to you to do the same, because like I said, there is value, in my opinion, in not, the legal side of this, obviously, I'm always gonna take the side of, let me get the most defensible decision regardless of which side I'm on. But from a policy perspective, I just feel there's value in having that information distilled and given to the, and you can even have a process where you bring more information. Like there's no, you don't have to model it under the way Hillsborough County does it. You can model it a lot of different ways, but to me, part of the conversation of the distilling down and having some professional, you have staff professional review, you have planning commission professional review, you have people who present evidence, somebody who can take all three of those components and distill it into an actual recommendation. I think there's value all around, but it is something that I know is very difficult when we've had this process in place for so long to say, I'm comfortable giving up some of it. And that your role is to say, all right, we think it is important, we want to put it in the charter, we don't think it's important enough to put in the charter, but we want, I don't know if you guys have the right to make recommendations. I was the attorney for this county charter review board before I became county attorney. So I was in Ken's position for that process, and then they didn't end up making any recommendations on charter changes. But they did make, they did send some recommendations to make some other changes, so.
Are the decisions by the hearing master, are those able to be challenged if someone doesn't? So those are just a report and it goes.
That's a recommendation, so that, they don't make it, the county process, I should say, there are certain decisions that are made by a hearing officer, not on zoning, that can be final. Zoning decisions cannot be final in front of a hearing officer or a board because of the nature of the state laws that relates to ordinance. So, all right, I may have overstayed my welcome.
One last quick question, I don't know whether or not this group will opt to do anything with the charter or not, but in terms of. There being multiple ways to do this, not in the charter, prescriptive in the charter, broad in the charter, any parting thoughts that would help this group consider what to do if they're on down this road?
I mean. I think, I think Ken's provided that some places have it, some places don't. If that's something you feel strongly about and you think it's something that you wanna send to the electorate. I mean, that'd be that's a decision point for the electorate, whether or not they say to themselves, you know what? Now, 80% of the people have never been involved in zoning, but anyone who has may have a very specific opinion about it. If you've been down at city council for something you're in opposition to and you're there for 70 hours, and you're thinking to yourself, why is this taking so long? And it's not taking so long because city council is doing the wrong thing. They have an obligation to review and take the information. Where I raised this issue of efficiency is, what if they already had it ahead of time? And not just the information that's given to them, but literally somebody who took all of the evidence and testimony and distilled. And they were able to look at it. And before they walked in that door, so I think that's why there's merit, and whether or not it's a charter or not, I don't have an opinion on that, but.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate you all giving me so much time. I love this.
Yeah, can I just, sorry, before Julia steps away, I just wanted to thank you, Julia. Sorry I'm not there in person, and thank you. This has been incredibly helpful. Appreciate, I know this is above and beyond your duties. So I think we all appreciate you coming by here.
Appreciate you, Ron. Sorry I didn't get a chance to see you in person, but I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Can someone remind me how the issue that to talk about this, is it emanating from us or is it emanating from a feeling on the city council that this process is broken?
My recollection is that, Kathleen brought it up. And if she's available, she's better to speak for herself, that she had mentioned that she had spoken to city council members, current and former, who had mentioned that the process was challenging.
I was going to talk about the notion, is there a community plan? Yes, there's a plan, I did what that looks like.
Yeah.
Stephen.
I think there's a learning curve.
Right.
Behind the quasi judicial process, and somebody that is a newly elected council member that isn't a zoning junkie, it's gonna take them a while to catch on. But this, and so I think we were just thinking, well, this would certainly bring them up to speed really quickly if they had a cheat sheet, if somebody that already went over the case, identified the merits, the pros, the cons, who spoke, 50 people all said this one thing, so let's do it 50 times in a row, that was a perception I think that I shared.
I think you could argue that the process is broken. And that, whereas any particular project, is gonna have supporters and critics. But I don't know if it really serves anybody's goal to have the process as chaotic as it currently is.
No. Whether it's broken or not, I don't have an opinion, but I don't think it matters. I think this is a much better mousetrap. I mean, to me, this was one of the best presentations I've heard in 6 months. And Stephen and Rebecca, you live in this world, I mean, Ken, you too. I'd like to hear from you if you disagree that this sounded to me like a much better way to handle this process, more protective of the city. I can only imagine if I was a city council and I wasn't into zoning, I'm trying to make better life decisions, not based upon what 50 people jumping up and down and saying, but based on what is right call. That's hard stuff. You're not educated in it, you haven't lived in that world. That's why I asked the question about, okay, who's hearing that? What's their training background? And if they're versed in this is what they're hearing all the time. They're gonna know the planners, they're gonna know the people, they're gonna know right from wrong, so to speak. To me, it seems like that, whoever came up with the idea of talking about it, I think, it was good. Kevin, she was great.
That was Kathleen.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Kathleen, well done.
Stephen, thoughts on what we just heard in the topic?
I just have more questions that I guess I think we're better.
We're looking to give you very inspired.
Right.
Since Julia left, I don't know if now is like the time to talk about it. It's kind of, but to me, it's relevant. I guess. So there, especially with the site planning zonings, it's a lot of information, they're very complicated. Some council members, they get the process and they know the code, others I think still don't really know the code very well. There's this, I don't know that the attorneys would agree to this, but there is a natural sort of negotiation that occurs sometimes. And like changes between first and second reading to the site plan, and it gets a little bit like blah, blah, west. Would this, is there something about this that would help control that a little bit better so that everybody knows exactly what's going to be voted on at second reading? Because sometimes it evolves, like there's a sheet of changes. It gets a little bit difficult for neighborhoods to keep up. And I've seen more than once where a council member will say, there was a change that was supposed to be here and it's not here and it's the second reading. And I'm like, how does this happen,
So.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I don't know what I think I just.
Okay, so. I 100% agree with what you said. Um. When Julia first came to the city, what they used to do was like write it on the site plan at the hearing. And talk about like what nonsense mess that was, right? That's what your site plan was, like Morris love Morris Massey, no disrespect Morris Massey, but you know, somebody scribbling on a site plan, some condition that he heard and nobody gets to review it, so. The plan was then, okay, you can't do that anymore, you've got to make them between first and second reading. And so that's a really valid question, if you have your first thing at the hearing officer. And the hearing officer doesn't recommend any changes, and then you get before city council, and city council says. I would approve this if you made these changes, you would still be pushing it off to another hearing. I mean, I'm talking it through in my head, you wouldn't want to go back to doing it at the same hearing. Cause that's worse. But I would think that if you had things more fully vetted. I'll be honest with you, if you watch the hearings at Hillsborough County. You know, you have the ones that are not contested. To me, I would think that those would still get a hearing before city council. Because we have to have a public hearing set for the ordinance, so I think that they would still have one. So I don't think we have a consent agenda. Open to someone telling me I'm wrong. But there is a lot less of the back and forth. And you know, like, oh, I'm gonna last minute throw out something that I had in my back pocket because there aren't, you know, the two readings. And you already have been to the hearing officer process and you have your report. It still does happen, it just happens less frequently. So I think that it would probably, I think the result would probably be the same as you'd have it less frequently because once you have your big report. Springing something new is still happens, but you're much more likely then to be told, well, then go back and tell it to the hearing officer. And so as an attorney representing a developer, you're much less likely to do that because that has to be noticed, right? So you're not just continuing 2 weeks to make your changes, you're months out.
Can I do, from a process perspective, I think there are two questions to answer. And we could do the first just by poll. And that is, do we want to do something in the charter around this topic? And then I think the second question would be a little bit more towards how prescriptive we would like for that to be. That probably would give you, Ken, enough to come back with a couple options or a recommendation. Can we, I think when we decided whether or not to talk about this at all, it's 5-4. So we passed that hurdle, but we've learned a lot more since then. Can I just get, and I know for the folks online, will watch your hands or have you tell us. How many wish to do something in the charter around moving towards this as they'll set this better mousetrap? How many people would advocate doing something in the charter? 1, 2, 3, 4, well, we have 6 here. And that's enough to move that forward. Ron and Kathleen, FYI. I'm not sure if you voted yes or no, but we can move it forward regardless. Sorry.
Yeah, and Rob, if I could just say, I didn't raise my hand on that, but the reason was I'm not sure yet whether we should do it or we should suggest that council and their lawyers give consideration to it. And so that's where I am. I do think it needs more attention. I'm just not sure what the attention should be yet.
Understood. Right, it's just this concept at this point. And we do have the option to put it as a recommendation. I don't know if that would carry as much weight or not. We've done that in a couple of cases, but most of our changes are charter related. Bobby, go ahead and then to Garrett.
I just wanted to voice the reason I didn't vote in the affirmative for the same reason. The charter gives the city or the council the ability to make word by ordinance. If this is something that we give them as a recommendation, the ordinance gives them more flexibility and more time to delve into it rather than just rhyming it in the charter.
Let me go to Garrett. You go.
We gave a memo to the last city council meeting. And we didn't talk about that yet, but not only was there, no conversation, there was no appetite at all. And I think that giving another recommendation to them is sort of a waste of time. I think that. I think we should move something forward and it should be very limited. And really not prescriptive at all. I think simply, as the county attorney said, she mentioned, I quoted something like, an interim review step must be in the zoning process. And if we leave it at that, then the public and the council has an opportunity to discuss what that looks like. We could talk for multiple meetings about, you know, the practicalities, et
Right, that's
cetera.
why I think we're.
And I don't personally want to do that.
Right.
I would just say, you know, if we could have a vote on, again, interim review step must be in the zoning process and see where that goes.
Hold that thought, I'm thinking you're leaning more towards just a recommendation, right, not a charter change, and then I wanna get those.
No charter language change, but very limited in nature.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
very
Very,
broad,
yeah,
persistent, and you gotta go.
Well, Gary, I agree with that, and Bobby, I think that a recommendation, let me say it this way. I think if we propose a charter amendment to some degree, I think it helps city council. I don't think the 7 of them, I think it creates more angst for them to have to grapple with this. The recommendation, not the recommendation, if we are recommending a charter amendment, this is what we send up to them. We spoke, and you know, and I look at this, I think we all agree. Someone has to come in, as Garrett's pointed out, and devil's in the detail, I get all that. But recommending, hey, why don't you consider it now? I really support the concept. This, to me, is really almost a no-brainer. This seemed to me to be much, much better for the city.
I just. Do you think it would be appropriate if I just played, the chair of council read our memo? And just, I mean, did you plan on telling us the response from council from the last memo? I think it would be helpful to the group.
There were no responses. From city council as to what Sound decided to bring to the board.
Okay.
And
We
then,
can leave it at that.
and I think the direction of maybe one was. Did anyone at that point in that meeting have anything to say, or even after the meeting have anything to say?
Nobody spoke up.
Right.
Okay.
So your original.
I just wanna make sure our group here doesn't think that this wasn't already asked, you know, I don't wanna go in
Right,
circles, yeah.
No, again, not. You probably interpreted it correctly, you could interpret that a couple different ways. We can still opt to have Ken draft some broad or non-prescriptive language for this group to consider and still put it. In our batch of things we're recommending the council, to your point about, and most of our points about. This seeming like a highly beneficial practice, Alan.
We have can draft 2 versions, one that is not specifically prescriptive and one that is a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, can you repeat that last piece? Ken is drafting, we're asking Ken to draft 2 things. One that is more prescriptive and one is less prescriptive, is that what was said?
That's right, that's what Alan said.
And we revisit it again after that, we
Well, we have
some
something-
language on, we've got something to at least discuss and have in front of us.
Yeah, so when we say prescriptive, Alan, do we mean as to an interim step?
It actually is what Garrett suggested, that we either suggest an interim independent step, or we do say, use the.
Here, Mr.
So it's 2 different, one is specific, one is not.
I like looking at both approaches, that gives us something to think about, and we could talk about it in more detail at the next meeting.
I disagree because we just sent a memo that had that language about a hearing master and council, it was a total no-go. I think it's a waste of time, to tell you the truth.
I think the wording
That's just my opinion.
with some. I'll paraphrase, I think, with some.
That's why I wanted to just.
What memo are we talking about? I may have missed it, and I'm guilty of that, but what memo did we send to city council about this issue?
So we didn't write a memo on our side, we made a request. That I channeled through Alan's office to say, can you find out? It was worded to the extent, would an interim reviewer like a hearing master assist? The city in the zoning process, or anything else you want us to know about that as we consider, it's pretty broad. And then if a memo is written, who wrote that memo? Does anyone know?
Question, not really.
Can we take it? Sorry, I didn't know. Ken, did you know who wrote it? Did the chair write the memo and then cover it at the meeting, you know?
The chair introduced it, a new business,
Yeah,
and. It sounds like, you're sorry, did it Eagle Hill?
yeah, no idea what it, no, it's short, it's quick.
What's that?
20 seconds.
No, I just wanted them to play it for, because I didn't see it, and I will let you see it, with the, okay, everyone.
Yeah, you can do that.
That's very relevant.
We're just gonna play a little snippet from the video, Ron and Kathleen.
Yeah,
Kathleen,
I-
you-
I think,
I'm sorry, I can't, I didn't see it, but go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. I really appreciate this conversation and dialogue tonight. I think we got some good insight. Garrett, just to pick up on your comments, I mean, I think showing them two versions of maybe some language that might be helpful to them, whether it's a zoning master or an interim step, I don't know. I think if we got, we just got very specific feedback versus sort of vague feedback so that we're not viewed as usurping their responsibility or their power, but that we're trying to, as I think Julia explained, sort of professionalize the process for them in a way that gives them a little bit of cover, maybe, and helps them to see their piece of the interaction and the guidance and the decision making that they're still going to make, but in a way that they don't have to go through it step by step. I don't know. I just, in all my years of living in Tampa, I think this is one of the areas that if there's anything that we could do, it should be viewed as being helpful and constructive, not in any way usurping anybody's authority. So,
what if we,
I'd-
go ahead, sorry, Kathleen.
I was just going to say, I'd be willing, whoever proposed two different versions and show it to them, have a conversation with them. I've had conversations with a couple of them and two prior city councils, and they all like the concept. I didn't have any language to show them. So I think it'd be worth trying to do that and see if we get any feedback. Thank you.
What if we to maintain flexibility and to not get over our skis in what our expertise is, what if we just put a sentence in the charter that vested the discretion in city council to determine whether a hearing master or interim step would be utilized from time to time by ordinance? It raises the issue, it gives them flexibility, it doesn't lock this in where if for some reason it needs to be amended or changed, it can't be without the vote of the citizens. So it's memorializing the mechanism for them to do it, and flagging the issue for them to consider. So they'd have to pass an ordinance. They could pass an ordinance saying there's not going to be a hearing master, or they could pass one saying there is, but it puts kind of the ball in their court and preserves flexibility for them to change it in the future.
Thank you, Ron. Bill.
Respectfully, I disagree, Ron. I think that is a little new, in that really gives us no, that's a recommendation to, if you want to consider, I don't think it gives them any of the cover. I think a recommendation for a charter amendment, hey, they can reject it, they don't have to put it on the ballot. They don't.
Yeah.
But we have said to them, we've listened, we've evaluated it, this group. At the end of the day, team.
But Bill, yeah,
We agree to, they're really not. But that doesn't mean, I'm not evaluating what we suggest goes up there based on whether they're gonna buy it or not.
Yeah.
Because I think the 9 of us, I don't think it, we need to make recommendations we think are the best interest of the city.
but Bill, with due respect, I certainly respect your conclusion and opinion. For me, I have a tremendous respect for Julia. I consider her a personal friend. That's one perspective. I'm not a land use lawyer. I'm certainly not a city council member. The reason I asked last time to get input from them is because I don't know what I don't know about it. And for whatever reason, they chose not to speak on it. And I feel like I'm not there yet that it is a slam dunk or that we need to do it. Again, I have a tremendous respect for you personally and your legal acumen. So it's not a personal disagreement. It's just that I don't know that we've got all the information to make it. And that's why I'm uncomfortable suggesting something that doesn't have flexibility built into it.
Okay, we should get more information. I mean, I understand that, Ron, that's fair if you're not to the point yet, but why wouldn't we then?
Because I also feel like we could do this we could spend meetings and meetings learning this and propose something, and if they don't want to do it, it's not going to go forward. And so I'm not suggesting we not
But
tell
it doesn't
them.
mean that we shouldn't do it, Ron. I mean, I think I agree with
I-
how Billy described it. I mean, I think in all of our conversations, this is the one that sort of resonated as an issue with the city from a go forward perspective. And I don't think it hurts. We know it all comes down to the language, just showing them some draft language that we all, maybe think is option A or option B the next time.
Understood.
Monica,
Point well taken, Kathleen.
I'm gonna pause you guys just for a second to allow folks here to speak. Again, we still haven't made a decision, we may still have something to look at before we do. Bobby, you had your hand up, and then, I don't know, Garrett, if you did or not, and then to Alan, so Bobby, go ahead.
I think Garrett should play that, but there's a couple things going through my mind. I also watched that meeting. It was panned. Nobody was interested in having the hearing master zoning board. After listening today, I think it's a good idea. I would support it. I think it, for all the reasons that you do, protects the council. You have this information synthesized, et cetera. There's all this other benefits. I agree with that. But one way or the other, this cat's gonna have to get skinned if we recommend charter amendment or just recommend think about it. I mean, one way or another, these problems are gonna have to get processed by ordinance. So
Well,
I
the
mean,
council
like,
gotta decide what they wanna do, if anything, with, that's the flexibility, they make the decisions ultimately to accept or reject, or do something completely out of the bounds that we even talked about. I wanna go to Alan and then see if we play that, and then decide if we can move forward with the action items, so we can cover other items tonight by virtue of Ken going away and bringing something back to us. Again, that'll be in 2 weeks, go ahead, Alan.
And I'm happy to see that clip over there, but we don't know what context. That conversation on the city council had, if this was frankly last week's meeting, that was a pretty chaotic and emotionally wrenching meeting. And day for the city council, and it could be that no one was in the frame of mind to start discussing something where.
Well, let's watch the clip before, any judgment like that's made. I just wanted to play it because we are an advisory board that sends recommendations and these code changes to council. If council has no appetite to push this forward, I think it is a waste of time, and that's why I'm saying something less prescriptive, more broad, maybe to Ron's point, that council could put in their own recommendations and thoughts on is more feasible. Otherwise, we're sort of just wasting our time. So I just want to play this, so if you've seen it, if we've seen it, I think it's here the whole group should see it.
It's just quick, right?
Do we need a motion to play it, or if we all sort of agree?
Yes, speaking to Charter Review Commission, Rob Henderson, sent an email which you all can have. They are, as probably alluded to by Councilman Carlson earlier, they are requesting input from City Council on establishing a zoning hearing master or similar to ensure that we have expert input when we're making our decisions. So I'm just bringing that to your attention as input. If you choose to provide them with that input, I will leave that up to you. I'm choosing not to. I would like to also acknowledge that tomorrow is the 10-year anniversary of the Pulse Massacre in Orlando. And a sad day for the state of Florida and District and many of the other nations as well. And we all have, I had friends that were, I family members of friends that were involved in that shooting. In fact, ironically, I was staying in Orlando at a conference and was supposed to go to that night, but did not. So, one gentleman is very irritated at Earl Hill. My family knew this family, and one of the survivors.
What's that?
Is also.
They just went off and talked on something.
I don't think it's, I don't think it's resurrected, right? They never talked about it.
I'll do so.
Okay, I just wanna make sure, because it's.
Someone said something.
Okay.
So I think sometimes if people are presented with two, option A and option B, either something that is suggestive, do what you want with it, and something with more definition to it, it frames the issue in a better way. We're giving it to them, they could do what they could take, you know, support it or they cannot support it. I don't think there's anything wrong with giving them two suggestions.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with giving them options or showing it. Less detailed, less fleshed out concept and then a more detailed or fleshed out concept, but I think just saying. You should have a zoning hearing master, I think each of them probably have different ideas in their head about what that means and all of their constituents do also, and so. To the extent that we can perhaps. Instill some confidence that we believe that there can be a process to do it in a way that benefits everybody. You know, we should, I'm not saying we should prescribe it, but I'm saying. At least point to some solutions or ideas or ways other jurisdictions have done it that has improved things. I'm not trying to make it kind of work either.
As long as it's.
It's hard to do now.
So are you migrating now towards more of a two-year recommendation as opposed to language that they would react to? Or
Or can we just look at two? I mean, again, some of us want the less, I like the more, but if we have, and it's not gonna create, the less isn't easy, you can write that in 2 sentences. Okay, that's done. But come up with something so we can look at it, I think Stephen, that was a great idea, is just show, you know, put a little meat on the bones. And, you know, you can even drop a footnote in there explaining why this all makes business.
Would we discuss the meat though? That is my concern. I agree with Al and Steve. I totally agree, right? Those two options. My concern is, could we spend 2 or 3 meetings discussing the balance or
I don't think we're gonna have to, I think Ken's gonna come, it's Ken's world. And I think you got the gist of what's gonna be.
I think this would be pretty easy to lay out, let's have a more prescriptive mechanism. You're still gonna need probably an ordinance to implement it, but to carve out exactly what should be in that ordinance. Versus a less prescriptive, which you shall adopt something along the lines of an interim stance. I can bring back, show you where that would fit in the charter and you can talk about it next time.
Let's go with that.
I think the only thing I wanna say is, I agree with that, I'm not saying I'm gonna support sending 2 of them to city council, but I definitely support 2.
And then we can narrow.
You may decide, you know. I would tell you, I've telegraphed, I'm leaning towards, let's agree on 1 and send it right up the ladder, but again, it may be 2, I don't know if I like the 2 concept, but I think the 2 concepts really good for us to have and look at.
Okay, so that'll be the next step. We'll revisit, focus, decide what we want to do.
And when are the zoning meetings usually? Thursday evening? Not every other evening, or an evening meeting.
Maybe short.
you still have it, but it just.
You know, I should look at it
more than fit.
All right, we're gonna move on to.
Some of them.
While we're in this area, I think actually we need a little bit more time.
Caitlin, yeah, I'm finding them now.
So is that okay if we delay this until
Yeah.
next time?
Yeah.
So this has to do with the question around charter changes to enforce our office policies.
I think it's as far as, when I did have a conversation with a young lady, she was telling me that trying to force the council to get something done within the fiscal year is not feasible, it's not going to work, like that, she was basically saying what we already discussed already. But when I spoke with another woman, she was explaining something about basically check-ins, and those could be a little bit more rigorous and like enforce.
Right.
I think like we said before, if they just did their job and enforced things, that things would move along a lot quicker. Sometimes they just run to the side and then things aren't followed up, so.
Okay. We'll. By next time, it sounds like you'll have more and we can.
Yeah, I'm trying to
You can decide what it looks like. I'm gonna move us to. So I'm going backwards here, folks. A lot of these were things that I've already asked, and no one disagreed with it yet anyway. Okay. The next topic is the, I think it's the first in the public comments list, which referred to whether or not we might entertain doing something more than independent inspector general or similar. And this was prompted by the public comment by the employee who felt that he had no recourse to work through HR to get that resolved. He ended up resigning. You guys have read that. We had several action items as a result of that. The first was to ask, which I did, city's HR department, how ethics complaints are handled. I can open, would you like me to open up their response here? Have you guys had a chance to look at that? Let me do that just because it's probably in this. Sorry. So we're looking at, for you guys online, we're looking at the HR response. So there's a link to the rules and regs. There's a number of links on the website actually that talk about the process, the ethics commission, who makes up that commission. They do in fact work with HR, they do in fact work with the city attorney, is my understanding. And they're also somewhat bound from some recent, I think, state legislation that narrowed down how much ethics groups could actually do. For example, can they start investigations, that sort of thing. I'm not gonna wander into lawyer territory, you don't want that. I'm like the opposite of Julia in that case. It talks about that there's a form that you complete. It's a pretty extensive form. I've opened it up. I believe you also have to, it's like a public hearing and express what's going on. Anyway, you guys can read this. It was a pretty short response around really links that tell us more about the way the city does that. So I'm gonna go back to the other, but I want to just bring this up in case you had a chance to read it. Again, you can see how it gets there. It wasn't clear to me, and I would say it didn't seem like it was the case, that the person who added the public comment took the step of getting to the ethics commission. There may be reasons for that. I may be wrong. If I am, correct me. But again, that prompted the discussion. In connection with that, we also had the benefit of some research by Ken. No, that's zoning and hearing. Ken, can you summarize this for the group of the work you did? It was quite a bit, actually. I don't want to add to it.
I was just trying to find examples that are in charters specifically regarding having an investigative body, whether it's inspector general or some commissioner or an auditor. So what we provided you are a snapshot here of how other charters have dealt with it. Some are rather long, that there is prescriptive as far as exactly how that process works. Others you would defer to an ordinance or something else along those lines, but it is out there. It's not as common as I expected it to be, just in terms of how many cities have done it. But it does exist in some charters, and it also is a power that city council could pass an ordinance and create a process as well. But if you're looking for specific language ideas as far as what this could be, that was the point of this research.
Thank you.
Yes, a quick question. So is it the case that there was with the zoning boards that the language in charters may be relatively rare, but the opposite is common because it shows up in ordinance or elsewhere in the.
Yeah, we didn't search every ordinance trying to see if there was a particular model, but as far as where it shows up in charters, this is what came out.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. The last thing here, Ken, I provided a link to an annual report if anyone's interested, just because I was trying to get versed on it before we met. Was something that we talked about last time, but might be worth reiterating, which is really, how does oversight by the state work? How do they play into this process? And how is that germane to this topic?
Sure, I think we talked about last time, the state has an ethics commission as well that enforces chapter 112, which is the standards for public officers and employees in the state. It's complaint based, you have to have someone file a complaint and that's when they dive into it. There's a appointed body then that meets in Tallahassee to consider ethics complaints and the staff that deals with that. So that applies across the state to all cities and counties. Beyond that, that's the governor also has the ability, as you see media coverage about it occasionally, to remove public officers if he feels they are not following the Florida Constitution.
My law partner one fellow here in Tampa happens to be the chair of that commission, John Phillips. So if anyone had any questions, feel free to give him a call. I'll give you his number.
Any other questions on that? If we done do that last time. Okay.
So I guess my question for you as a group is. Maybe it comes down to whether or not we feel the existing rules and processes. Are sufficient or not, whether they constitute enough of an issue. Let's talk about what is the issue we're fixing. That we investigate and explore recommendations, charter changes, etc. Thoughts, input on this, or anyone has stronger feelings about it? Right?
I'm gonna come down on the side of pro Office of Inspector General. We've had so much discussion among this body about investigations, who does them, who starts them, what are the roles of the different branches of governments in investigations and HR issues. And this just seems like a pretty clear-cut way to have a non-political, hopefully, third party, or at least different from the political process, come in and be able to respond to some of these issues that we've been discussing ad nauseum almost here for meeting after meeting. It's just like a great solution to me. With all these discussions about what city council investigate, what is the limit of their investigatory power, how do they subpoena, all these things are answered by the creation of this office to some extent.
Would be an elected position or is that?
I'm not right.
The typical model is it's an appointed position.
From what if I could add to that, Mr.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I tried to look into some of the ordinances, some are by committee selection too often.
Right, you can set that up, whether it's a council appointment, whether there's a committee that then reviews applicants for that role and appoints, there's an infinite way of setting it up, as far as like to set up. The question then for the group is whether, if you want to pursue that kind of thing, do you want to lay out all the detail like some have done in the charter? Or do you want to require council to pass an ordinance within a certain amount of time, as is done in other places of the charter? Given our prior conversation, that could be the kind of thing I bring you to office. If you can say anything.
I'm just, I think we have a pretty robust ethics commission. The one thing that, seemed to be a problem from the public comment was that the head of that was also the head of HR. I, don't have a lot of experience with how, not just other local governments do it, because I don't think this is necessarily a local government problem as far as that, but how other businesses do that. You know, is there someone other than HR? And then if we were to set up somebody who is an efficient, separate than HR, how does that interact with HR? Like, what do you do with what they say? Like, where does that go? And then the same question with the internal audit department, because if I heard what you said, you were looking for an investigative inspector general or whatever, who would handle those ethics complaints. So they would be outside of HR as well as I'm not sure how that will interact with the current internal audit.
So there's some how that we need to figure out. Do we have concurrence to go back to what Bobby voiced, that there's a need? Other comments on that? Input, do people share that feeling, or most people feel like we're covered and mostly okay? Thoughts from anyone else on this?
Would the inspector general be appointed by the mayor, or is this someone who city council? I guess appointed by the mayor and confirmed by council, right? Or whatever, I probably got my wires crossed on that one, but that would be the idea, right? This would be under the control of the administration.
That's up to you.
Because I think the question from council was related to some of the investigative power under their authority. I'm just remembering that question, you know, they were talking about their authority, so.
Right, issues around the administrative side. That they want more influence over. Yep, that's correct.
I mean, right now, the internal auditor, and to me, there's two separate questions, you know, there's the whole audit thing, and then there's what we do if you have an HR ethics issue. But the internal auditor right now is head of the department, and they perform them as required by the mayor or supermajority of city council. Reading it correctly. So what would this other person do?
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, I don't wanna spend money creating
Yeah,
something that you already have that's not
right,
substantially different and. Unless, and maybe we could fix it within that. I don't know.
were you gonna suggest Bobby that was to be maybe, you know, nominated or appointed to the control, so.
No, I think that would, from what I read in the notes from Ken, it's an independent separate body. So, from those notes that I read, it looks like mostly in the charter. The inspector general is selected by committee process. How those committee members are selected, I think varies on charter by charter, city by city. And to the internal audit, language that we already have in the charter, from my understanding, I thought that was limited to more. Just like straight up and down, looking at the books pretty much, whereas the inspector general would have broad authority over all public matters within the city, projects, budget, et cetera, anything the city touches would be the purview of an inspector general, and that's just my read on what notes said from, again, I don't know if anybody else looked through those or has any thoughts on that.
Does anyone know if the city has a compliance officer?
I don't think anyone knows offhand on this here.
Yeah,
Could you elaborate on?
Yeah, Ron, what's the thought behind this question?
yeah, I'm just, first, Bobby, very good work and diligence, and it's very helpful, appreciate that. Yeah, my instinct is I'm not sure this is a charter issue. I think the operational aspects of how the city implements itself is really up to the mayor and council. I was satisfied with HR's response about how they handle it. I know that there was a single anecdotal individual who provided some information, but I don't see a systematic problem. And my instinct is just because there would be, I think, confusion with roles of what other city individuals already do, including the HR director, including our auditor, internal auditor. Yeah, my instinct is it's more of a operational issue for the city than a charter issue.
Other input from anyone else? I may not be reading the room, I'm not feeling a surge of support for this. Am I wrong?
So I mean, sure, it could be done by, I mean, it's just kind of mirroring the discussion we just had, just going with exactly, sure, yeah, it could be done by ordinance. It seems like people don't have any interest in this, but I mean, I would say we want to send a signal. I personally think it's a bit of an idea to be a charter change, but I see a lot of indifferent faces, so.
I'm trying to balance, I'm thinking through, I think you all discuss this. at the tail end of that last meeting because I didn't catch that. I'm trying to think through it. What's the issue, the challenge? Does the state's ethics commission, does that cover it? You know, if you've got a real HR issue, keep in mind that you do have, you know, the ultimate hammer, that's the court system. Something goes terribly wrong, it's not pleasant. Getting higher order and also. Seen that happen. I'm just trying to get it, wrap my head around it, Bobby, I'm thinking, so.
I wouldn't say I'm indifferent either, but I would also say that there are a lot of rules and regulations with HR. I'm not completely enamored with it. But I don't know how the inspector general solves the problem, gets around what you're already required to do through HR. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't wanna, I'm not indifferent. I'm just not seeing, I haven't figured out in my mind how creating a separate entity solves the issue when you still have this and you still have, right?
I see what you mean, I'm not an expert either, and I didn't even try to come up with any language about how that would look, it was more just a philosophical point, referencing some of the other discussions we've had. But then my mind goes to all these other cities that have this position in their charter, like, for a reason, like, why, there's gotta be a reason that it's in there, I mean, and I'm sure they have HR departments, they're under the ethics committee, they have state rules, like. So why does, you know,
And what are
what
their
we're saying
charters?
congruity, between our city and theirs.
Right, and what are their charters suggesting that we say, what do they do?
It's what was in the work that Ken did for us, where he actually pulled the language. I don't know how it works,
Okay,
but I know that he gave examples where it outlined kind of a framework for it, right, Bobby?
So they have, I'm sure, I mean, they must have HR departments, they're under the ethics rules, and states, they have ethics commissions, et cetera, but they have this extra
Layer,
layer
yeah.
where there's this. I'm just gonna read the language here, it's what's it? Basically, a third party, it's an employee that the city hires
Mhm.
to touch everything, not just the internal audit department, which looks at the books, they can do anything they want. City projects, is HR doing the right thing, are the books straight, like they just cover
I
everything.
see the problems of having somebody else involved in situations, because HR is gonna protect entity, a company or whatever. Whether whoever's doing whatever wrong and they what you want. The HR is gonna protect the city. Right, but if there's something, another layer that is watching them to make sure that they're also being fair, I think that does help.
I think that was the essence of the original comment. That's where that was headed. Alan, go ahead.
But we're not talking about an issue that's specific only to HR, we're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, an inspector general that could investigate anything.
And
Right, and just so. Or problematic behavior, or whatever. So the question becomes is, would it behoove us to do something that would allow us to to judge the appetite for this amongst, whether it's, you know, the city council or the mayor's office, to see if this is something that's wanted. Because we are talking about something that would be a useful tool in situations that cannot be anticipated. And so we're, you know, going back to one of our mission statements is, what problem are you trying to fix? You know, we're fortunate that we have not had a debilitating scandal in the city government. But should that ever happen, is the city, you know, equipped to look into something that is serious?
Well, yeah, Alan, I love the city, but I wouldn't say we've never had issues. I mean, we've had city council members indicted and things like that. There's been a lot that's happened. We've had a lot of issues in the history of the city where those things have come up. So I'm not taking issue with you, but the fact that we haven't had a problem could also be indicative of the fact that the process is working well. And it was a comment made that the HR individuals will look out for the best interest of the city. And I think that's true, but I think that it's important to understand that the best interest of the city is not sweeping things under the carpet or protecting employees who are engaged in bad activity. The best interest of the city is always to terminate individuals who are doing bad things and bring things to light. And so, my professional experience, good HR people are quick to suspend and fire individuals who are engaged in bad actions that get brought to light.
I think the question on, at least from the public comments, stemmed from the notion that this person felt that HR wasn't doing the right thing, and that there else to turn. Again, it's one example.
Yeah, but respectfully though, everybody who's on the losing end of an argument feels that the person who made the decision wasn't on their side, right? I mean, that's par for the course and how those things go down. It doesn't mean that the system is flawed. It just means that the individual didn't agree with the result.
Thanks, Ryan. Ashley, and then I'm gonna just do a poll of the room. I'm not feeling that most of us certainly want to do anything with the charter. We may not even want to do anything with the recommendation, but we'll get those numbers in a minute. Go ahead, Ashley.
I have to disagree about the HR doing the right thing all the time in the best interest of the city. They're also doing what's in the best interest of their job and what's gonna, make everything flow. If anybody's disrupting that flow because they have been disrespected or mistreated, they're going to say something. And that person can be squashed, and their voice can be squashed, and that's not right. So if there was an additional layer to kind of create a check and balance over HR, then hopefully it wouldn't be needed. And just because we have had little scandals and things like that. But to say, maybe the system's working, that's why we haven't really had a big thing. No, the system's working and people are getting squashed. That's what's happening. So.
Or they're settling and not.
Still laws are happening.
Right.
So.
Rob, before we take the vote, can I just read some headlines that I just briefly pulled up here, that I think kind of illustrate the point.
Yeah.
Jacksonville Inspector General blames failure to train city contract manager for lost $1 million parks grant. Inspector General details $73,000 in overpayments to Jacksonville Housing Authority employees. Inspector General concludes Boynton Beach misconduct allegation that was kind of about leadership staff, et cetera. Palm Beach County Inspector General explains nearly $2 million discrepancy in Pahokee audit. Jupiter Inlet Colony paid $48,000 in improper insurance and other costs, audit says from the Inspector General. I know no one expects those things to happen.
Right.
They were discovered because there was an office in place to look for them.
You almost have to act like the Washingtons and the Jeffersons of the they had to have the foresight to think about what could happen. And that's a special place to be in. And again, we're just giving recommendations, doesn't mean that they're gonna go ahead with it. But we have to think of things that not even think of random things, it's things we've seen personally. Where somebody's was mistreated or mishandled or whatever within their job, and it just didn't pan out, and they were on the losing end of the stick. But that they should have, they don't have money to go get a lawyer. They don't have money, they don't have time to deal with all that stuff, so they end up quitting, or being called.
Bobby, the point you made, those headlines, I think you made a kind of a jump to the conclusion that the Inspector General is the one who discovered those things. I mean, again, I counsel clients and have for 30 years on various matters and issues that come up. It may not have been the Inspector General who unearthed it. That might just be their job in that capacity. And there may be other people if there's no Inspector General. In other words, if an allegation comes up that funds were misappropriated, the lack of an Inspector General doesn't mean that the entity or the city are not going to act on it and do the right things. We may have people already in place who do those things. And so I'm not sure that creating another position accomplishes unearthing of things as opposed to just redetermining responsibilities of individuals. Again, I'm not convinced that, Ashley, your points are well taken. People get, have a thumb put on them all the time in all walks of life in a lot of circumstances. So I would not take issue with that. It happens, and it's part of how I've earned a living too, is protecting and representing those people as well. But I again, at the city, the question is there a systematic issue where we need to change the process to do that? And I haven't seen the evidence yet that we don't have the mechanisms in place through our current auditor at the city, the ethics commission, the city attorney, and other vehicles to address these issues as they come up.
Yes, and then I do want to do a poll though, so that we can see where we sit as a group, just because we may or not.
Sure.
We just have more satisfied. Go ahead, Bobby.
I take your point, Ron, and just because those headlines say Inspector General unearthed some wrongdoing doesn't mean that the Inspector General, that they wouldn't have, been discovered or dealt with in some other way. But because there is a third party, an independent body to deal with those things, that addresses some of the conversations that we've had early on in our meetings about balances of power, who controls investigation, et cetera. Now, to me, this is almost like an investigatory balance of power question. If you have, administration, the HR, us over here, with the abilities that they have to look into this, if you have a city council with limited investigatory capacity, maybe someone would bring up an issue. It would be investigated by HR, but then there's also an independent body as a layer of review or protection or oversight that may see things in a different way. It's the balance in between where we are now and I think with these other cities now.
Just a quick question. Does anyone know if the Human Rights Board is still active in the city? I was just reading through the charter. There is in chapter 12, a human rights administrator with a board of 9 that has subpoena power. They can look into a slew of different issues. They have investigative authority. I would. There we go. Well. Is that on the city's website? Oh wow. That's
I can't see it, but.
That doesn't look like real people. Maybe they are.
Stock photo. I think, I'll use Rebecca's phrase, I don't think anyone's indifferent to this, but that's different than whether or not we proceed.
Yeah, I was looking at the process of what you were saying, honestly, honey, I was thinking.
Can I ask by show of hands or voices on how many wish to pursue some notion of a charter change around this issue?
I'm not sure I'm gonna vote for it in the end, but I don't want to kill it tonight.
John, we have 5 here, I think that's enough. I don't think Ron or Kathleen may have dropped, I think she's overseas. But nothing for Ron. Okay.
It's hilarious.
So more than 5 minutes.
So, all right, so we don't want to kill it. Let me ask the next question. Do we prefer having Ken present some options for charter language or options for recommendation? Because we still have recommendations, I've only 2 so far. Where's our appetite for the former? Actual charter language versus recommendations on this issue? Maybe just around the room real quick. Can you say both? You can, and I'm gonna ask that. Can we do that then? At least I don't move the ball forward. We can have.
Can you ask council? I mean, again, I'm not.
This is what last time.
That one doesn't. Go for the council, that didn't matter.
Yeah.
I think that whole thing that Joey presented was one heck of a good idea. But this one, I'm trying to learn more about it. I don't want to kill it tonight, but I'm not sure what I need in my head to get to yes. And it may be, what those, I don't know if there's another source of information on this part.
Who's the
To propose a charter amendment, I don't know if I have enough info for that yet.
And just before I call him this evening, we'll have to think about if it goes to council, how we frame it, because it could be a lot. But this is, if it's, you know what I mean, when we get there around that, Steve.
I think it was in Jackson. I'm sorry, I didn't see the two cities that you identified that had this already, so.
Jack, the longest.
Well, like the most, well, I think there was a question, and I would be interested in knowing the answer to how that office works in conjunction with existing, with some of the roles that we currently have. We have a director of internal audit and we have a human resources director, so it would be helpful to understand how that coexists. Jacksonville, with those, if there's any overlap or.
We can certainly look at that.
Yeah, I think that.
I think they have to all be together, or they can be separate, or, you know.
This is HR.
Am I- Let me make sure I'm reading.
Take the rights,
Yeah, what is the,
rights versus
where's the,
human rights versus.
Civil Rights Act issues.
can we maybe take it back to where we are, guys, on this, so. An appetite to learn more, I think we haven't yet fleshed out what we need. There's one suggestion to learn more about one city and how they do it. Ken, you were gonna say something though.
Well, I just wanna make sure I have the direction clear. You want me to do the same thing you want for zoning to bring back a couple different options, or are you looking still at higher
Information.
more information at this point?
That's what I was saying, Rebecca asked questions about, what is it this will do, and I think. We can find a way to get answers to those questions.
But what we could do is take the examples that we provided and show you how they fit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All of them?
Yeah.
All the different ones?
Yeah.
Fine. So that would be more of a set of operating hours for each of them.
And I guess I'm trying to understand, is it something that is purely redundant by design, or is it supposed to be consolidated by design, or is it, there's like different flavors?
You might even have this commission will be wrapped up in an office of the. That kind of thing, I know it all blends.
The way I read the Jacksonville one, it seemed to like everything rolled up to the OIG. But I don't know that that's true everywhere.
I think the other thing we'll have to keep in mind is that you could have seven different models. That's a different thing than how well they're actually functioning. Just because they're interesting or unique or novel, we don't necessarily know that those bodies are functioning at a high level, so just keep that in mind. So I just want, I'm thinking down the road a little bit about getting to a decision for the group and whether or not that gets you there. I think it gives you more context, but this is more about the why, I think, and if we think there's an issue deserving of something. I think most of us are kind of leaning that way, but is there anything else you need though to confirm and get us toward an actual recommendation or a charter change on this?
I'm just gonna ask outside of Jacksonville, what was the other example? Because Jacksonville's such a big government.
Actually, Gainesville,
The
the city of Thoreau. There wasn't a lot, honestly, I was surprised at the small amount. The
Yeah,
city of Thoreau was like 18,000 people, and they had a robust.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
Jacksonville makes sense. It's such a-
Jacksonville makes sense because it's, yes, it's like basically its own state practically,
Right.
same with Miami. And then the city of Miami, Gainesville, Tallahassee, and I maybe Naples.
Yeah.
All due respect to anyone I forgot.
Yeah, so that's why we should be advanced.
Did it work for you?
Rob, can we get the job description for the internal auditor of the city and ask the question if there's anyone responsible for compliance and get their job description?
Sure.
And can we also ask the question if there is an allegation of fraud or misuse, who handles that at the city currently?
Give me just a second, I'm writing this down. So question one is there a compliance officer? And if so, the job description for it? Right?
Yes, correct. And then the internal auditor's job description. And then a question, and this may be something that we ask of the city attorney, but the question would be if there are allegations of fraud or misuse of city resources, who is responsible for investigating those?
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
For restating that. I got all of those. Yeah, I think we've got some action items, but this is good as further down the field next week. I'm not sure when we're gonna finish the Super Bowl, whether we're moving the ball. That covers those items here. And in fact, I think that's it for discussion, public comment. I wanted to take us to, we'll look at the charter changes last, those typically make us feel good and we say yes. So we can zoom into those before we're done and leave happy. But I want to go back to something and have you help me refresh my memory. It's in that famous 6031. I just don't have any notes on it. And I don't want to be remiss in not covering the last of council's question. How we skipped it, I don't know, but we spent a lot of time on some of these, so it be possible. All right, we're probably already there. Okay. So the question that I didn't have any notes on, and of course I could have just deleted it, we would never know, but that's not the report means, is should interim appointments, so this is in 6.3. Should interim appointments, including the appropriate length of time the department head should serve interim capacity, be reviewed? Do you remember if we specifically talked about that? I don't think we were. Sure.
I know, we did, we said no.
Definitely.
We definitely did talk about that.
About that.
And can someone summarize where we landed so I can update our notes? No. I don't want to go listen to this. I can listen to this.
Stephen brought up examples.
And I don't think we didn't propose any changes.
That would be my assumption because usually we move forward eventually when we're done. I just didn't have a note specifically like all the others.
So I just say no.
Yeah, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything.
All those making issues.
Okay.
Is the ninth.
Consensus that. The consensus is that should not be reviewed. Consensus is leave it as is. Okay, I'm not gonna ask twice, I'm learning this.
The deadlines and why this one.
Yeah, so I just want to confirm with the group. Okay. Now we can do the fun bit, see that? I'm gonna zoom over to, I put them in PowerPoint so you guys can read them. For the group, I don't know if you can see the screen or not. You gonna share that pizza with us, Ron? There. Oh, it's really good. And you're in Jersey, it's probably pretty good pizza.
Very good.
Yeah, great, sorry, levity. I think we have 4 changes, some are really easy like this one. So 10.06, you can see we're proposing to remove that obsolete language at the end. Is everyone okay with that 10.06 change?
Yes.
That was 15.
Okay. Good job, Ken, on that change. Yes, we're going to a lot of great album, but I'm just this is the
216, 7 days later.
This is a more substantive change, 10.10. You guys can take a look at it. And if you remember, we all voted agreed to a 12-year cycle on this group's role. We also he's gonna explain this beautifully on the standard.
What I did in terms of shifting out to 12 years, you needed to have a commencement date. So I came up with this should start in the fall. That gives you the full year to be able to complete your work. You had asked that we removed the creation by ordinance. So it simply requires that the CRC be appointed for a term of 1 year. The city council appointments would be done by resolution. And then you'd also ask for additional city staff and administrative and research support to allow for a comprehensive charter review. This takes out at the end here as far as the direction given to it by the city when it comes to rules for your operation and procedure.
I thought you addressed everything that we brought up and very succinct and accurate.
Just want to make sure you have context.
Can I ask you a question? I don't know if I'm allowed that.
Of course.
When I read this, I read it several times. Would it be cleaner to say dedicated administrative and research support staff or city staff at the end? Or are we okay with this?
The reason I put dedicated city staff was to not imply they had to hire additional staff.
That's how I read it.
All right, good. So are we good with 10.10? We're good. Okay. Thank you, Ken. Okay. This is another case of obsolete language being removed. We all give it 11.03.
Well done.
Guessing we are.
I had a lot more fun with the last one.
Now. Yeah. Okay. No,
You'll need a motion then to.
Yes.
After the read.
Yeah, exactly. So can someone, other than actually proceed with a motion to get us to memorialize these decisions for the charter changes?
Motion to accept the three changes to 10.06, 10.10, and 11.03. Second.
It's been moved properly seconded. All in favor, say, discussion. You see none, all in favor, say aye.
Hey,
All opposed, say nay. Moved properly seconded. Hold on, sorry, motion carries.
Thank you. Thanks for the reminder on that. Well, we have more homework to do, but in terms of open discussion items, we've gone through them all, as far as I can tell. But I wanted to ask if there's any new business anyone wishes to raise before we get a little bit early, see each other in a couple of weeks. Any new business from anyone? Ron, any new business from you?
nothing else.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
What were we gonna do with the public comments on?
I'm sorry.
What were we gonna address the public comment, like, that's not news?
We have already. There's a section at the end of the document. We've been using.
About, like, somebody, just the evening meeting and all that stuff, did we discuss that?
Oh, yeah, we did all of that. That ended up being, let me just show everyone this real quick. Yeah. You probably have, most of you have seen it. I'll just point out. It's not, I mean, it's on the same document that I'm using. So. There would be. So at the end. And since we're all living and breathing inside this document, what I've done is I've listed the recommendations we've made. When we talk about public participation, we landed on a general recommendation in our last meeting. And then if you continue on, you'll see, and this is what I've been using in this meeting. These are discussion items that were brought up, if you remember, as a group, and that's why I indicated below which ones this group wanted to delve into more of. I've done that, taken notes, when in fact we didn't have enough votes to do so, but for the ones that we did, you'll see the in process banner, so that we're continuing to work on those. And then up above, it was 2 meetings ago, I shared the fact that I took the time to look at public comments and ask the question, have we talked about it already? And most of them, in fact, almost all of them we have, and I've mapped those, and again, I think you guys have seen this. It's been out there for a month, I guess. The exact mappings, if I've missed anything, you want to contest that, great, we can do that, but I graded them out. The ones that we did not. Had not done so were the one around the 5 p.m. that led to the recommendation. That's what that conveys, and then the item we just talked about. So that was my full list, as far as I could tell from it. Including everything from public comment received today.
Okay, that's one of our recommendations.
Yeah, the recommendations is at the end, and it is. The way we've worded it so far, we'll have a chance to tweak this if we want, is. Consider, I think we get a motion, consider all available options by which the council may increase. Public participation in their meetings to include evening sessions or multiple meeting days. Yeah, so. I think I read that right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can.
Rob, can you, Sorry, you gave me the opportunity to speak and I said nothing more, but let me just ask one question. Do you know offhand how many more scheduled meetings we have? And if you can, for a minute now, if not, maybe at the beginning of the next meeting, just kind of walk us through a timeline of what we have left and how we're tracking on pace to how many meetings we have.
Ron, definitely, I'll give the short answer and then maybe we can dedicate a little bit more time next time. We essentially have August as our last month to meet in order to meet the time and get this to council. That means 4 more meetings by my count in this month, 2 in August. Two in July, 2 in August. As far as how far we go along that route. Really, until we do this and we ask for more information or need to talk more, I don't know. But if we don't have any surprises, I would have said 2 meetings coming in today. I'm thinking 2 meetings after today. So July, be done by the end of July. That's my off the cuff, Ron, but we can see where we land when we reconvene.
Any motion to adjourn the meeting?
So move. Second.
The motion properly second, all in favor say aye. Opposed nay. Motion carries. You adjourn at this. 8:10.
I want to talk to you about. Yeah, it struck me that you understand. Yeah, so. So Bobby. Basically. I don't have anything. There. That's why.
It's a lot to think about.